have a reputation for like hating the SDR model. I can promise you 100 times over that Rolodex dries up real quick if it was ever worth anything at all. Yeah, so this one is going to be easily the most divisive. It is every single
Let's
day
go.
and
That's what
every
we're here
single
for.
conversation I have.
What's up, guys? This is Riley Soward, co-founder of Orbital, and here today I'm with Ryan Heaphy. We're really excited to dive into the first episode of the Vertical SaaS Go-to-Market Playbook. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks, Riley. Happy to be here.
I'm really excited. I feel like one of the reasons when we were putting together the cast for the show, we were really excited to work with you. Is I think you've worked with so many different vertical SaaS companies today. And obviously that's the whole idea behind the vertical SaaS go-to-market playbook. I know the 5 don'ts that you've seen from working with a wide range of companies are going to be lessons that a lot of founders and go-to-market operators are going to learn a lot from. So before we dive in, I think it's very helpful context just to have a bit of background on your experience working with vertical software companies. And then from there, we can dive into actually chatting about the 5 common pitfalls of what to don't do, and then what actually to do instead as you scale your go-to-market motion.
Yeah, so background on me, again, Ryan Heaphy. I've been in software sales for over a decade now. I focus primarily on vertical SaaS companies where I've been everything from, top selling founding rep, your director of sales up to leading an org of 30 plus sellers and an layer of managers there too. So I've kind of seen it all. Today I have somewhat of a VIP go-to-market consulting business, if you will, but I am a full-time go-to-market advisor for a venture portfolio of nearly 150 companies focused entirely on vertical SaaS. My day in and day out is helping vertical SaaS companies get away from founder-led sales and stand up their sales organization. And I'm proud to say in just the last 24 months, I've had 7 companies and counting go from that inflection point of being around seed stage and doing founder-led sales and really standing up a sales motion that led them to their Series A. And candidly, amid an extremely sort of difficult fundraising environment we've had the last couple of years.
Absolutely.
So proud to be doing the work.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking to the right guy for this. Let's dive in. I think we can go through each of these 5, and for each, I would love to kind of hear your summary of the pitfall, and then really dive in. And we always try to get tactical with examples and follow-up questions to make sure that our audience can learn as much as possible and put it into practice. So let's start with number 1.
Number 1, I think the first sort of faux pas, if you will, is hiring sellers without really developing a real sales playbook.
Yeah.
And I think the form that this comes in, or at least sort of the narrative that I've seen, is for a lot of companies, when they raise their Series A and they get that first sort of cash in hand, there's been this thinking of I use this cash to hire sellers and the sellers help me figure it out. Right. And that's particular, let's face it, not every founder has done any sales ever before, or maybe they feel like that's not their aptitude or their strength. So there is sort of this tendency to be like, let me hire some salespeople and they'll do what salespeople do, right? They'll sell. And that's just not reality. Right. And so this notion of a sales playbook tends to be, even though the phrase sales playbook tends to be sort of this amorphous phrase that nobody really knows what exactly it is, but it's a lot of things, right? It's everything from your messaging around how you do cold calls, how you do demos. It's written rebuttals to objections you're going to face day in and day out in your space. It's your buyer personas, understanding what makes them tick, how they operate, how they're paid, how they're measured, competitive landscape. How do I make sure everybody on my team understands who's out there and how we differentiate? So those are some of I would say that's one tier of what you would want to put in your sales playbook. Other layers to that would be things like your tech stack and your opportunity life cycles, right? First of all, defining when do we open an opportunity? What sort of criteria needs to be there? And then what are the stages it moves through so we actually can track our pipeline? There's a lot that goes into it. And suffice to say,
Right.
again, even when I sit down with a lot of founders and I say, show me your sales playbook, they'll be like, oh yeah, we have that. And they'll pull it up
Mhm.
and it's sort of like a couple paragraphs on a Google
Yeah,
Doc.
I can relate to that. Yeah.
So, like, good start, sure, but effectively, when you're hiring new folks, you have to be in a position to literally hand over as the founder. Here's everything I know. Here's everything I've built in a way that they can take it and do it effectively the same way. Otherwise, you're like classic case of kind of throwing these people to the wolves and hoping it works out.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm curious how you would advise, let's say you're still founder led, how would you advise that sort of iteration process? Maybe you put down some initial thoughts on some of those areas you talked about. What does it look like to then actually iterate? I think there's document like getting it down on paper is one thing, and then having it actually be repeatable, I think is the other part of this, right?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I'm going to start by maybe answering a slightly different question and sort of back into this, which is, you and I talked about this briefly. Like, so how do I know when I'm ready to hire sellers? If I'm standing here telling you, you're like, you might not be ready, then the question is, how do I know? So one of the things I work through with a lot of the companies I work with, I call sort of the scale ready signals. And like many things, it's not a black and white, like you're ready or you're not ready. It's a bit of a spectrum.
Hmm.
In this case, like I even literally write them out as a red light, yellow light, green light, and we say, where are you at? It's just a red light, yellow light, green light. And we want all green lights, right? So some of those scale ready signals would be, at least in this space, and obviously like some of these AI boom companies are changing these metrics pretty quickly. But I would say like baseline sort of fingers in the air here would be you are at or above 100K in ARR.
Hmm.
That is both like built and live. This is like
Right.
money in the bank. We've done 100K baseline, right? The next one I would say is the founder has run a sales motion. They've cold prospected, closed, and onboarded 3 non-advisor customers. And that's the key thing here is like, yes, that's a great play early on is to go to your advisors, go to your network, work the warm intros, work the low hanging fruit. And that could get you 100K. But it doesn't sort of check this box of like the founder who should be the company's very best salesperson just by like understanding of the product and the direction of the business. They should have been able to sort of execute on a bare minimum process, open to close from cold, whatever that is. Call, call, an email, LinkedIn message, whatever. The next layer to that is you've done that and it's been documented in a way that it could be shown and shared to somebody else. And this one
Hmm.
is cliche, right? It's like talk to the founder and they're like, I've done it all. It's all in my head. I just need to sit down and write it. Right. And then that sitting down and writing it becomes sort of a daunting feeling. But if you're writing it as you go and then iterating, I think it becomes a little less daunting. But the idea is it does need to be sort of packaged again for somebody else who's not you to be able to take
Hmm.
and understand. The next one I would say is uh this goes back to the ARR live, but the payments should be collected and billed live annually at the time of signing. This is not a hard and fast rule, but I think generally it's a good rule of thumb because it's just easy to kind of fall into a trap of build contracts that are like we'll collect the
Hmm.
payment in 6 months or we'll collect the contingent on this or that. And in my mind, those are effectively like good faith deals more than they are
Those are like pilots.
proven.
Yeah, they're not like true repeatable revenue.
I'm not going to discount them and say they're not a sign of life and a signal that things are trending well, but to sort of check the box and say I've proven that I can reach out to somebody, run a sales cycle, the product market fit is there, they see the value and they're willing to pay me money for it. You have to be able to check that box. Next one is customers should be fully onboarded within 45 days of signing. This can vary depending on your segment. If you're way up there in the enterprise space, that might be different, but generally
Hmm.
vertical SaaS is not at least starting in enterprise. So we're looking at lower ACVs, SMB, mid-market deals. And because of that, customers should be onboarded and live within like 45 days. And this is a function of a couple things. Number one, it should be a function of their own urgency to actually implement the solution you sold them.
Mhm.
The other one should be a sign of your effectiveness in onboarding. So if it's taking you 3 months, 4 months, 5 months to onboard a 10K customer, like you're not ready to rim up this engine and scale this thing because you're going to drown on the CS side. And then the last one here, a vast majority of customers should be live using the product and have great feedback. If you were to, again, that's the green light. If we were to take the yellow light and the red light, it's like red light is like, oh my God, nobody's happy. This isn't working. Yellow light is like, we have some people who are happy, but half the customers are having issues. It's a pretty good sign that you're not ready to sort of scale up revenue, and thus you shouldn't be throwing sellers into a space where the deals they close possibly won't survive on the other side, despite their best efforts.
Well, yeah, I think this is a really helpful framework. Like, it sort of feels like you want to get to a place where you have something you can hand to an AE. You are like, from an actual revenue standpoint, you are at a place where you want to actually go pay quota on those deals, meaning like these are actual deals, right? These are going to be customers you can retain, customers you can onboard quickly. It's not really like a hypothetical contingent pilot or something like that. And you're seeing all the right things from the product standpoint that if you said, hey, if we scale this 1, 2, 3 times, it's repeatable. It's not going to be like a leaky bucket once you actually go start paying a ton of money to ramp that sales team.
Exactly. I'll back into sort of our original question of like, what else needs to be there? It's far too often that we have this other case where everything's sort of a test and we throw everybody in. But if you haven't done all these things, what you're missing across the board is any level of standardization that makes this scientific method, right? Like
Mhm.
you're stuck in a position where everything is a variable with very little controls. And so to look back
Interesting.
and say this is working well is really difficult to actually confidently do. The other thing where that sort of bleeds into then is like, well, how do I know my people are doing it? How do I know these are good sellers who are really effective
Right.
if the three guys I hired are all doing things completely different? And like one got a deal this month and another one got a deal a couple months later, and another one hasn't gotten a deal, but they have 10 times as much pipeline. Like, what do we make of that? And the answer is usually very little. Like we're kind of blind on that essence. So I'm a big fan of making sure that as you iterate, you're still following scientific method to know if you're heading in the right direction.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it almost feels like, to summarize, based on those like gates or those goals, let's say you're starting to think about hiring someone and it's still founder led. You would document the current playbook, like V 0.1, for example, and then score yourself against those different goals and basically understand red, yellow, green. How are we doing? And then it sounds like iterate on the playbook itself, as well as like just the what feels like is the broader product and motion actually repeatable, um, to then be confident to go hire someone.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when I work with folks on both ends just starting out, the first sort of audit, if you will, is exactly this exercise where I give them sort of a checklist of the sales playbook and I say, literally check mark or not check mark what you have or do not have. And then of what you have, tell me your level of confidence in it. And I'll be candid with you, even the ones that have like high level of confidence, it's like, okay, let's go back to the drawing board on this. um,
Awesome. I think that's a great start for the first lesson here. Let's dive into the second. So, what would you say is the second most common pitfall you've seen with scaling go to market at vertical SaaS companies?
Yeah, so this one is going to be easily the most divisive. It is every single
Let's
day
go.
and
That's what
every
we're here
single
for.
conversation I have, which is implementing the SDR model to fix your.
Mhm.
Let's let that sit for a minute. I will say, from my perspective, it's actually become very rare to meet sales leaders and other folks who even really kind of remember how to do it without an SDR model. So I think that makes things really tricky. But let's face some of the realities of vertical SaaS in particular, right? We're reaching out to some of the most outdated spaces with the most
Mhm.
outdated technology with the most stubborn, non-techie people who have the most inertia to continue to do the way things have always been done. And so inherently, part of being a really good seller in these spaces is becoming an expert
Mm.
advisor that can challenge current notions, understand what they work through, and ultimately build their trust and problem solve for some of these folks. And you just don't tend to see that with the SDR, right? Like, unless you're going to invest a ton of training in them to become that, which my argument would be like, if you're going to do that, just make them a full
Yeah,
cycle
just
AE
make them
anyway.
an AE.
Unless you're going to do that, you end up having people who are just making the phone calls, asking for interest. And that's a very hard thing, particularly in vertical SaaS, where you don't have these tech-minded CMOs and people who are like interested in see what's out there. You tend to have more closed off defensive people. So I'm going to start by like kind of setting the stage with that. But I think a lot of times when the companies I work with have a pipeline problem, they're either short or they're trying to figure out how to get more. They look around them, they look at LinkedIn, they look at everything else out there, and they're like, everybody's got SDRs. I should hire SDRs. And I think that maybe it could be an answer. And I'll give you my thoughts on where I think it is an answer. But there are things that you need to look at first to sort of tell the story, and that's the metrics, right? So, for example, let's say you have a low volume of activity from your team and also a low conversion of that activity to pipeline. So there's a couple different things we could dig into there, but the highest level is like, and we're not talking enough people would probably,
Mhm.
right? Not a fact, but an area to put the microscope on. Next thing, right? Like, okay, activity is through the roof. We are calling, we're emailing, we're doing everything. And we just have a really low connect rate. We're not even talking to anybody. That's where we might say, okay, maybe our data is bad. Maybe we need to contact Riley at Orbital, making sure we're reaching out to the right contacts and improving our data. Here's another one that I see often is high volume, low connection rate. Is you have reps who are making calls and they say, hey, I'm calling for Riley. Is he there? Nope, Riley's not here right now. Can I take a
Straight to the
message?
gatekeeper. Yeah,
Well, even then, straight to the gatekeeper. Gatekeeper says, not here right now. Can I take a
right.
message?
Yeah.
Nope. I'll send him an email, hop off the phone, and do that 200 more times today. And so effectively, that's an exercise, a skill improvement of multi-threading, right? Who are the other stakeholder personas we should be asking for to effectively squeeze out conversations from this same single call step of the sequence we're running?
There's a reason why everyone's going to SDRs, and it's probably because one of these problems, they're actually experiencing one of these problems. So this is great. Let's keep going.
All right. So the next one I would say, high volume, fair connect rate. Like we're doing volume, we're connecting with people we want to talk to, but very low conversion rate. So the thing I would look to
Mhm.
there is, what the heck are we saying on the phone? Like, what is our messaging? Is it resonating? Are we digging into the right pain points for the right persona? So that to me is effectively like cold call script review. Are we just calling saying, hey, we're cool new software, or are we jumping in and digging into real problems of the industry? Low meeting show rate, right? Like, hey, we're booking meetings. We got a ton of them booked, but we're like, call it sub, I would say 80% is pretty standard, right? So we're only getting half of our calls showing up or less. So I would want to look at, again, the messaging. Are we digging into pain points, or are we sort of telling about cool software? And also, are we multi-threading, right? Are we setting
Mhm.
meetings up with a single point of failure, or are we setting meetings up with all the relevant people who need to see something like this? And so there's a little bit of a deep dive. Again, these are like smoke signals, right? Run all your metrics, look at this, look for the smoke signals. And the reality is you can look for team-wide smoke signals, but if you have more than one rep, you should be doing this at the rep level, because rep
Right.
A might be the one who's struggling with industry knowledge and they're just going to shut down. Whereas rep B understands it really, really well, but they're not doing the multi-threading and they're stuck at gatekeepers and all that. So my point being, when I see a deficit of, let's say we hit 80% of our pipeline number, my thought isn't, let's go hire 3 SDRs to catch up on the other 20%. My thought is the metrics are telling us right here where we're missing on the other 20% of our pipeline. the full cycle reps we have today.
It makes sense. Like basically, it sounds like the idea is you want to diagnose the problem versus just like trying to throw more people into the mix, especially like hiring a bunch of SDRs. Are there any other things you see that are like, in addition to what feel like very concrete steps in the pipeline that cause like sort of pipeline problems? Are there any other common pitfalls you see there where it could be maybe you're like, hey, they actually should be doing some marketing and like cold calling isn't enough. That's just like an example, but I'm curious if there's any other kind of reasons beyond just the performance of the specific reps you guys have.
Yeah, marketing is certainly important. I've actually come to feel like a lot of the companies I've worked with over the last, certainly the last few years, probably should have started doing marketing sooner than they actually did.
Interesting.
But when you look at like sort of where folks are at, marketing generally won't get you to like your big milestones. I think of it as sort of the fuel on the fire sort of thing. So if you have no fire and you haven't figured out a sales motion whatsoever, like no amount of marketing is necessarily going to change that. And so I think like the other thing is marketing takes time. Like paid search and all those things take time to kind of start to see traction and a return. So I think like it's a good thing to start. And actually, a lot of companies I've worked with have started with like third party sort of outsourced vendors to start doing paid search and content
Right.
marketing and sort of get the ball rolling before they like spin up some big function internally. But again, generally, like I feel confident that if I talk to somebody with a pipeline problem and we diagnose the metrics we looked at, like there's much lower hanging fruit than most people would think in just better sales execution with like good focus and an intention.
Awesome. Last question before we move on to the third. I'm curious. Yeah, are there any scenarios where actually you would advise an SDR motion?
By the way, I have a reputation for like hating the SDR model, but I really
Yeah.
don't. I just think that it's gotten away in my mind. I've seen so many scenarios where it was not effective and it was expensive and it was a distraction, but there are absolutely other applications that I've seen be wildly successful. And that one in my
Mhm.
mind is when your inbound and any sort of signal based channels reach a level of demand that requires a speed to lead function, right?
Interesting.
So we know inbounds come in, I forget the standing number on that, but if we call them in less than 5 minutes or 2 minutes, like the conversion rate's through the roof versus if we don't. So suffice to say, if my AEs are focused on running demos and even doing their own prospecting, they have a tendency to miss that inbound when it comes in hot. And you can expand that into, if marketing does a big blast, that we start seeing opens and clicks and intent-based signal sort of stuff where we also want to hop on that like the minute they're clicking. SDRs, I think, are the function of speed to lead to like hit those folks right where they're at. And so inherently part of being a more mature company is you have a more robust marketing function, a slightly bigger brand, like people are interested and curious and looking at you. And that comes eventually. But for your like 0 to 1 vertical SaaS company, the reality is like most people aren't looking for you. They've never heard of you. Even if they did, they don't, not super interested in doing anything different than the way they would. So
Yeah.
I think it takes a lot of time to get there, but yeah, speed to lead. You could argue that they could report to marketing in my mind because they're almost more of a function of jumping off signals in a time limit than they are like the typical SDR model is like you're basically the personal assistant for some snobby AE.
I think this is great for yeah, implementing the SDR model or not implementing the SDR model as sort of a band-aid. Yeah, so we're 2 out of 5. Let's dive into the third. What do you have for us?
Yeah. So the third sort of failure mode, if you will, is building a free pilot sales motion. Some of the environments around this are we're hoping to close deals that are not fully baked deals. And so we're getting to the end, we're getting pushback and risk mitigation objections and things like that. And so we say, well, we'll give them to go for free, right? Some of the other layers to that are complex workflows, which is inherently part of every vertical SaaS company is you're ultimately implementing software for a complex workflow. And so again, we get this kind of idea of like, well, we're different. We have this super unique way of doing things. And to make sure it works, we need to effectively implement it. So ultimately, like, again, this kind of goes back to the scale ready signals. If the customers we're closing are like booked revenue contingent on this pilot that are not paying anything for, it's a pretty wild distraction for you to have to go and get all hands on deck to stand up a customer who's not actually even effectively bought in and usually has some sort of opt out along with their
Yeah.
free pilot. And the other thing about free pilots is there's no skin in the game.
Right.
We could get a couple steps in and find out that 80% of the people involved in this didn't even know that they signed up for a pilot. So we can't get in touch with the contacts we need to implement, and everything kind of just falls apart. So I'm definitely a really big believer in, number one, not doing any pilots, and we'll come to that. But even if you do a pilot, you got to collect some amount of money for it, whether that's an implementation fee, some other sort of skin in the game to, again, make sure that implementation happens, people are showing up, and there's something at stake. So coming back to like, what do we do instead? If Ryan Heaphy is saying we shouldn't be doing free pilots, what should we be doing instead? Fundamentally, buyers who are not committed are not sold. Very unprofound advice here. Like, if you're not at a point where your prospect can commit to a full implementation of what you're selling, you're still back to the drawing board on selling the
Yeah.
solution. And usually that's spending more time with more stakeholders to reach a organization-wide consensus. And so I think this is something that a lot of folks slip up on, where they carry out what they think is a full sales motion with like one or two people, only to run
Yeah.
into what I just said.
You're not multi-threaded enough.
Exactly. Even if you are, let's say you have I'm going to name some standard generic titles, right? You got the owner, you got the co-owner, and you got the director of operations. Those are the big brain trusts of decision makers, right? And we get to the
Mhm.
end, we've done this whole sales cycle, and they say, well, this is great, but I'm worried my people aren't going to want to do this. So let's just kind of test it. Right. And so we missed entirely the opportunity to make sure we're gaining a consensus from the people who are actually going to use this day to day before we ask for the commitment to jump in.
The one question, because I very much see what you're saying. I think, having
Sure.
also been in the shoes of some of these deals, and when I think back like 3-4 years to the early days of Orbital, sometimes there also are situations where you're just like, hey, look, this is a really good prospect. It's our first enterprise prospect. We know today we don't have enough reputation, we don't have enough stakeholders, like whatever it is, we just like don't have enough to actually do a deal here. But we feel like the learnings are kind of invaluable, or the logo on our website's invaluable. I am curious, like, are there exceptions to the rule, or how would you just kind of think about those scenarios in the early days? At a certain point, like, you got to just like walk away. But I feel like in the early days, sometimes you just like need, some sort of forward momentum, even if it doesn't have dollars attached to it.
Yeah. That's a great question. Are we going to potentially change our entire focus, both internally of our team, of our product roadmap, potentially of our CS team, like run everybody thin on like a really huge customer who effectively hasn't fully committed and isn't paying for these resources to happen? And you get sort of
Yeah.
this, you're stuck in this chicken or the egg, right? Like, do we do all that stuff to hope to win the deal? What if we don't win the deal and we spend all this time and resources? And then the other side is like, well, what if we win the deal and we haven't done all this stuff? So I think I do have a couple tricks in the book, if you will. The not trick, like pure sales execution, is like sell the deal until it's sold. You know, bring them to at least 99% level of confidence to move forward. But I've for sure had my share of companies that, want to kind of swing their weight around and say, look, we just don't operate that way. We don't pay unless we do da 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 da. So the sort of trick I have in the playbook here would be still have them pay, whatever that is, implementation or implementation plus half or all of it, if you can get away with
Mhm.
it. But you can offer an opt out contingent on them completing onboarding, right? I can tell you that of every anecdotal situation I could think of where this is done, the number of companies opting out after they've been onboarded is virtually zero. if you have a good product and a good process and everything, is virtually zero. Like the biggest risk is that things fall apart during onboarding. And so
Which is
like
kind of on you. Yeah.
yeah, but it also isn't, right? Because let's go back to the point of if they haven't paid anything, what's at stake for them to get their shipping gear?
Well, it's on you if it's a good
Yeah.
deal, or like if it actually was a good like substantial deal and use case, then it's on like the post sale side. But yeah, it also could have been a mess up on the pre sale side too.
Yeah, exactly. So like let's look at what the customer is trying to solve for. They're trying to mitigate risk, right? We also want to make sure we're getting paid to to staff up CS, do all the stuff we need to do to onboard a big customer. So I think it solves for effectively both, which is skin in the game. We're collecting money up front with money in the bank. We know we're good to
Mhm.
pursue more spend. And then effectively, if all hell breaks loose and we don't get this customer live by the way we expect it to, they can opt out. And quite frankly, I think if you cannot get the customer live, that's probably the right thing to do is sort of pull that parachute and reflect or figure out like why are we bombing this before any more damage is done. So
This is a good one. I honestly think this is one of the, from both our experience at Orbital, like our own sales process, as well as just working with a lot of startups. I think it's the hardest one because as a founder, I don't know, man, sometimes like it's just like, let's just take what we can get. And you kind of are trading off between a known thing, which is, hey, let's just like do or what feels known or guaranteed. Let's just do the pilot for free. And like the unknown, let's go deeper. Let's double down on our sales process and try to make a deal happen. And it's tricky. So I think it's good to be, it's good to be disciplined.
yeah. And to that point, like I don't like to put out any hard and fast rules, but more sort of tell the cautionary tale through anecdotes. Like
Right.
get it. You're going out to fundraise and you want to be able to say we have this big deal in the pipeline or we have them working. You should just
Yeah.
be painfully aware of the downside to that risk, which is honestly and oftentimes like more likely depending on where you're at than the upside. So the cautionary tale is just like not biting off more than you can chew, particularly for deals that are not committed or paid. Because if they fall apart, you've now burned whatever it is, 3 to 6 months pursuing something that wasn't real.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this fourth one because I even in the past like month or two have been at a few different vertical SaaS dinners talking with founders, and I've heard on multiple occasions the question come up, "Hey, I've been talking with this person who's like in the industry, and we're interested in bringing them on as a salesperson." Let's dive into number four.
Yeah. So hiring industry experience to shorten ramp. This is one again that I think is prevalent in vertical SaaS. I could tell you I have like a gray hair in my beard for every single time I've been told, well, our industry is really complicated. It's really nuanced. It's
Yep, yep,
really hard to teach. Right.
yeah. We hear that
And
all the
so
time.
I hear it every time. And okay, that it might be true. But honestly, the span of 150 plus companies I work with, I wouldn't say any one is any more complicated than the next one. It's
Right.
just like that's the space you're in. You're in a space of solving complicated workflows for a niche group of industry professionals, if you will.
Mhm.
So I think what ends up happening is early on, maybe you've done all the stuff we talked about. You've hired a couple sellers and they've learned it. And generally the first founding AEs have a lot longer to figure it out than most other folks. But as you start to hire more cohorts and you try to scale, of course we all want to shorten our ramp time, right? So we shorten the scope of how long do we think it should take somebody to learn this product, learn this industry, and become a good seller. And this is one area where most companies I see just run into a wall. They run into a
Mm.
wall because the next group, the next cohort, and the next cohort are failing to get it like the two guys and gals that we gave a year to figure it out. And now we're expecting these folks to figure it out in 3 to 6 months.
Right.
The other trouble, again, that I see going back to the sales playbook is the training is here's a Google Doc, study this Google Doc, and we're going to get you on the phone.
Yeah.
Right. So where people are utterly failing at this is not investing in training and ramping early on to get people up to speed. And the shortcut is, well, I just need people who already know this. The problem with that notion is industry folks are usually not sellers first. And so we get really sort of excited by the idea of this guy who's been in, the oil and gas space for 20 years
Right.
or, whatever it is, because they know all the contacts, they know all the people. I can promise you 100 times over that Rolodex dries up real quick if it was ever worth anything at all. And so when we start to think about, like, sure, if that's helpful early on, maybe get them in as an advisor, maybe do some rev share. Like
Right.
there's some things that I think are worth doing that are not making that person your salesperson. At the end of the day, I'm looking for a salesperson first who has all of the qualities of a great salesperson, to name a few: curiosity, problem solver, gritty, invested in, not afraid to make phone calls. That's like one that for some reason industry people hate making phone calls. So I'm looking for somebody that has the best qualities of a seller. And then I want to teach them the industry. And I can promise you, like, it may not be easy, but it can absolutely be done. The example that I always use is my own example. When I worked at a company called Qualia, which was selling a platform to title and escrow companies, we were selling to title companies as well as real estate law firms. And so
Right.
our sellers had to learn this entire like weird niche sort of oral tradition process of real estate closings and everything a real estate attorney would go to law school for, to get on the phone and go like head to head with these folks.
Right.
And I'm not saying it was easy, but we did it. And that's the caliber of salespeople we were looking to produce. The question is like, well, so how do we do that? And I think that too many folks just stick with that. Like, we have a Google Doc, we have some calls you could listen to, like listen to the call library, and then we put you on the phone. Or worse, the worst version of ramping that I see is you shadow that guy for the next 6 months, and then we
Right.
hope that you can do what he did. Utter fail, like almost every single time. Also takes forever. And so the way that I think about training and ramping is it is an asset that you invest in that pays dividends forever for your business. Like, the way you teach people how your business works in the industry it works in is not a sales onboarding. It is an employee onboarding. For anybody ever to work at your company and be effective in marketing, CS, sales, whatever,
Mhm.
they need to be able to come in, digest this fire hose of information, and come out the other side expert advisor in what they're doing. And
Right.
so I think that there's a lot of different sort of ways to package this, but I almost think of it like there's learning management systems that are out there. Like, I guess Lessonly got bought, but Lessonly was one where you build modules and you have quizzes and you have ways to test knowledge and you spend time on it, and then you do have a call library and you have all these things. So I can say with certainty, companies don't invest enough or as rigorously in employee training up front as they absolutely need to not fall into this cycle of, we can't get people to learn this, we got to just hire the industry guy. I'll pause there.
This is awesome. No, this one's awesome, and it comes up so much, and it's so easy, and it's so funny because I think it's honestly something we haven't even thought about with our product, and we are not in like a, we're serving companies that sell to legacy industries, but we aren't ourselves in a legacy industry.
Right.
But yeah, it's easy to kind of convince yourself that you're different. And all it took was one conversation with a sales coach on our side where they basically said, look, there are people selling way more complex products to way more complex buyers. Like, if you hire good salespeople and you onboard them well, like, you'll figure it out. And I think that wisdom, like, if you think of the full spectrum of stuff you could try to sell and how technical some of these products are and how nuanced, certain use cases might be, like, most software products, especially ones in vertical software that often are powering the core kind of like just the core workflows of a business, are like, you can train someone to go sell.
Absolutely. I'll even just like strike one thing you just said, which is like hire the best salespeople. But if there's any sort of question in your mind of things they need to figure out, just create a piece of collateral for it and spend time on it. And
Right.
in the age of ChatGPT, man, this is so easy. It's so easy to put together collateral on any given topic and have it structured and even write a quiz at the end that you grade at the end of the week to make sure this person gets it. They can go spar head to head with an industry veteran on day 30, versus 9 months later.
Totally. Yeah. So, okay, we've talked about hiring. We've talked about SDRs. We've talked about pilots. Yeah, I'm curious. What do you think, sort of, as the final common failure mode, is worth covering before we wrap up the show today?
Yeah. So the fifth one on my list here is selling enterprise without having sort of a cross departmental enterprise strategy. I'll
Hmm.
shorten that even to like chasing enterprise without a plan, effectively. And this one, like many other things I've said before, is not like here's when to do it or here's when not to do it. It's sort of a
Hmm.
spectrum of like readiness to pursue something like that. But I think that too often opportunities present themselves that are attractive, very attractive to a founder, but can also be like distracting to their demise, quite frankly. So I'm going to use like a blanket example here. It's like if Walmart falls into your pipeline somehow, what you're selling, that's pretty exciting, right? Like you can go flaunt that
Hmm.
to all your investors, you can flaunt that to your customers. That would be huge. It's a $3 billion deal. Everybody knows Walmart. That's great. But it's not as easy as just going and chasing that whale. And there's a lot of sort of risks that come along with doing that, um, either too early or without preparedness. The first of which I would say is the amount of time and resources it takes to spend on a prospect like that. That is quite frankly, in a lot of cases, pretty fat chance.
Hmm.
These folks, sometimes you have somebody who's like, they're just like cautiously interested, but not like
Yeah. Well, we always hear
organizationally
we'll
shopping.
kick the tires. I always know when someone says, "I want to kick the tires," run away, because it always means there's not a serious conversation internally about your product.
Exactly. So those folks are out there and they can trick us and we can get really excited and honestly like burn a year of focus on something that's just not serious. So that's obvious. The
Hmm.
other one that I think is more of an inherent risk, and sometimes it's helpful and sometimes it's a really large risk, which is a shift in your product roadmap. Sometimes a big enterprise customer can help you fill gaps that unlock
Right.
other enterprise customers, and I think that that is valuable and worth considering if that scenario is real and possible for you. I think the flip side of that case is a lot of times uh, a huge customer, even before they're a customer, even just while they're in the evaluation phase, can essentially force you to change your product roadmap and pigeonhole it towards this one customer's workflow or the way that
Hmm.
they want things. And it actually moves it away from product market fit for the broader market. And so you tend to see that with huge customers, which in the past they've spent maybe millions building some big custom solution, and they want your solution to work like their very custom solution, which ultimately
Hmm.
may not be even a fit for the rest of that enterprise segment you want to go after, and certainly a lot of times not a fit for everybody in the smaller markets. So I think tail wagging the dog on product is a pretty large risk even before you ink the deal with a really large customer.
It makes sense when, especially in the example of these like really extreme enterprise, like if you're very early stage and all, like based on the size of customer and the stage, like it makes sense. Hey, if you're early stage and it's a huge customer, definitely you need to have like the right things internally before you can go pursue that. I'm curious, like at what point do you think it often does make sense for companies to think about actually going more enterprise, and what are those things internally you think you need to be like enterprise ready from a sales and product and post sales perspective?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm always very skeptical and cautious when I speak to a founder or sales leader who's like, let's call it 20% of our market is enterprise, but it makes up X amount of millions or trillions of dollars. So we're standing up an enterprise sales org to go after it. And it's like, okay. But here's some of the other things that we haven't really thought through, right? Which is when you sign a really large enterprise customer, you need to start to think about how many CS folks will need to be scaled up to support that. Like, again, if we sign Walmart, are we going to get 2,000 Walmart users with tickets every single day just from Walmart? So thinking about staffing that up. Other things that a lot of folks never think about is what sort of security or compliance standards do we need to get or
Mhm.
maintain? If you haven't done your SOC 2, it's like a lot of times a formality, but you're going to pay money for it and you're going to have to like go and put in place all the protocols to get approved and any other sort of security and compliance that you need to get. Do you need to up your insurance? Does this provider need you to up your cyber insurance or anything like that that could increase spend to basically meet that requirement? And then even like a lot of things we don't think about is like how will this impact infrastructure capacity? Do we need to spend more to be able to um support 2,000 more users in a deployment or something like that? I'm not a CTO, so I'm not going to claim I know how that works, but I know when we're reeling in that whale, we're generally not thinking about it a lot of the time.
Right.
And worse, a lot of times we're not communicating to the CTO to make sure that this deal is like going to be able to be supported. So I think those are the things we need to start to think about. Backing into your question of like, well, then how do we do it? If Ryan is saying don't just like go all in on enterprise unless that's truly like your segment. I think generally what I typically see that goes well is you kind of creep into it. Like you have AEs who are working SMB mid market and they make a cold call and accidentally stumble on a whale. They go, oh my God, Riley, this company has 10,000 locations or whatever makes it enterprise for you. And you say, okay, I am taking that from you. Or we're going to work this together or something like that. So I think, again, when you do that, you have to just think through these things I mentioned, right? Like, will this company help us get on the map in enterprise? Maybe. That might be a good thing. But when these deals, I think, go right, when these creepings go right, it's usually with sort of a strategic customer who has all the right expectations. And so
Mhm.
right expectations might be they know what you are and they know what you're not. Black and white, right?
Yeah, that's an easy one to fall in the trap of is you try to sell too much up front, even though you didn't need to, but you just like want to promise like, yes, we do that, yes, we do this, and suddenly
Yeah.
you're signing up for a lot more than you can handle.
Absolutely. Yeah. So they know what you are, they know what they're not. They're willing to work with you to sort of test features. I think a fair understanding is like, look, if you're the first big customer I'm going to roll this out to, like there's going to be some hiccups along the way. Are you okay with that? And again, like when we think about the tech adoption curve, these are people who are on like the innovator side where it's like we're big, but we're innovators. We want to charge into this and we understand there's going to be some bugs. We're cool with that because we want to be first. Right. So if they're not those people, I
Mm.
would say if they're anywhere down the line, you might be taking too big of a risk because their expectations are not based in reality of what they're going to experience. And I would say the other one that's just a deal killer or a deal not killer is just previously agreed upon scope of product build. If you during the evaluation, hey, we're missing this, but we promise to build whatever that is that you say you need, and we're going to charge you for it. Um, get as specific as possible with exactly what that scope of work will be. Because obviously, as things pan out, not building it the way that they wanted or not building the way you agreed can ultimately lead to, and I've been a part of a company that signed a huge statewide deal and mapped out all of the scope of work and we're like 2 years into development of it. And even though they were clear up front on what would be built, the scope on customers end kept growing. They wanted more, they wanted different, they wanted more and
Right.
different. And eventually they had to walk away from the contract because it was just no longer
That's
headed
brutal.
towards a real solution. So I think like there's always that risk. And I think in the right scenarios, you got to take that risk. I would just
Mhm.
mitigate that risk as much as you could possibly
Right.
control. But yeah, once you creep in with like a really good customer that I think is willing to be all these things, a little bit of a guinea pig, right? Actions, crystal clear on what we'll build and what we won't build and what we're going to charge you for. If they help put you on the map in a certain regard, that's a really good leg up to kind of cross into enterprise space.
Yeah. It's funny that it definitely aligns with how it ended up kind of playing out with Orbital like a couple years ago. And I think when the right ingredients are there, like your first couple enterprise deals are like truly trajectory changing for the business in
Yes.
terms of product learnings, in terms of brand reputation, and honestly, just like confidence from a sales team. You're like, wait, we can go do this. And once you kind of have to do it before you can then feel confident to go hire more people to do it or this or that. So when it naturally makes sense, I think it's game changing, but it also has a lot of potential to go wrong. So you have to make sure the stars align.
Yep.
Well, awesome, Ryan. These are five really, really tactical, actionable failure modes and lessons for what to do instead. So glad we were able to walk through all this, and thanks for diving through all that. Yeah, before we wrap, would love to just hear. I'm sure I know you work with a lot of vertical SaaS companies. If anyone's interested in getting in touch with you, what is the best way to do that?
Yeah, thank you. So through my consulting business, my primary focus is in vertical SaaS, helping founders get from effectively 0 to 1 and then 1 to 10 type of thing. And the daily work is really a lot of what we talked about here, like different strategies to pursue or not pursue, sales playbook, and lots of coaching and things like that. So if anyone wants to reach out and at least sort of do a diagnosis and see if there's a way that I could really help you out, best way to find me is LinkedIn, Ryan Heaphy. Ryan Heaphy Consulting is the business. Send me a note and we'll get together.
Awesome. Well, Ryan, really appreciate the time today.
Yeah. Thanks, Riley.